Hello and welcome to Rise of Humanity. I am your host Chris Karamaya, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by my guest Jamye Price. Jamye is an international energy healer and channel. She is author of the book Opening to Light Language: Humanity's Evolution into Multidimensional Communication, and has also developed her own healing method, Crystalline Soul Healing, which is a powerful healing modality for soul progression. Jamye is a passionate individual who is very much dedicated to her work in assisting in the ascension of humanity. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show today, Jamye. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So I just wanted to begin by saying that I've actually been using some of your light language audios for a little while now, and I'm finding it to be a very powerful tool for ascension, and it's proving for me to be a very powerful way of keeping my energy balanced and keeping grounded while dealing with the challenges of life and ascension. So I just wanted to start off just by saying thank you so much for doing this work.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
So I would say I know from my own experience that light language is a very powerful tool, but I haven't done a huge amount of research into it. So this interview will be as much for me as for the listeners. So if you could just begin by explaining what is light language.
So light language is very natural to us. It's a form of nonlinear communication. It's like the language of the soul, the language of love. It's a higher frequency information because it's outside the bandwidth of our linearity. So light language is just a form of communicating information or transmitting information that your higher self always understands, always utilizes to help you release or activate in a way that's perfect for your moment. So even, for example, as you're experiencing the light language audios that I've done, every time you listen, you're releasing and you're activating for that perfect moment. So you'll have physical changes or emotional or mental or spiritual changes because it's like your soul, from a human standpoint, is helping you to remember the fullness of what you are or your nonlinear nature. And then as you're moving through this linearity of the human experience, that blending of those two is helping you to expand even as you're just dealing with life day to day. So it's just a broad form of communication that is communicating love in more of a non-linear way.
Yeah, and so the light language is itself, is it a like a word for word translation, or is it more like a representation of the energy?
Most times it's not a word for word information flow. It's multi-layered, and so there is aspects of understanding that can come with it. Sometimes you're going to get rather linear translation, at least for part of it, but even with that, there's likely many more layers to it. Some of the languages that are a little closer to our human track are a little bit more interpretable, like the elemental languages or some of the galactic languages. And yet they're all conveying information. It's just not as linear as we typically communicate.
And are there lots of different types of language, and it's not just one single universal language?
Absolutely. There's so many different layers and types of light language. So to get very broad, there's elemental light language, so fairy, elven, leprechaun, all of those things. There's a form of communication for them. There's angelic light language. There's galactic light language. So many different galactic species that communicate with us. There is ancient or future earth languages. And then broader than that, there are two types of light language. There is light language that is absolutely unknown on Earth. So it's some of those that I was mentioning, like galactic or angelic or elemental. And that's generally called glossolalia. And there's probably other terms for it that are a little bit of offshoots of that. Here in the States, we often know it as speaking in tongues. Then there's xenoglossia, which is a language that's unknown to the channel, but is a known language on Earth. So in essence, it's being able to communicate in a way that your mind doesn't understand in the moment. Because when we learn languages, we learn by memorization. We learn by collective agreement. We all choose to identify something in a certain way, like a tree or a flower, and then we get more detailed. This flower is a rose, this flower is a daisy. But we learn by contextual memorization. This form of communication takes that out of the mental constructs of memorization. It takes it out of the ego, and so it's a much more heart-centered communication. So those general types are going to be filtrated through your own soul lineage or your own soul connections. And generally, when people first start communicating with light language, connecting with it, and it starts flowing through, they are generally connecting with languages that are very close to their soul lineage, that are an experience that they've had or something that's very close to them. And then generally, a little after that, it doesn't have to be this way though, but generally a little after that, you're able to connect in with languages that are less about your own soul path and more about certain energies that are appropriate for the flow, or if you're working on healing another person, you're connecting with an energy or a language that's theirs and not yours. So there's a lot of variance to it because it's your soul language that you're going to be, your soul path that you're going to be connecting with as you start to transmit. Even the receiving aspect, you tend to be drawn to things that are appropriate for your moment or appropriate for your soul lineage. Like some will be more drawn to galactic languages, some more angelic.
And so it sounds like that you're saying once you get more advanced, you can adjust your own kind of light language to become a healer for other people to, speak a light language that's more appropriate for them.
Yeah, and it never really matters if a language that's coming through you is yours or theirs. You can absolutely be an effective healer if you're just accessing your own languages. There's a slight difference in the experience, but absolutely all of it is helpful because it's that heart communication that's occurring.
Awesome. So how did you begin your light language journey? Were you working as a healer already and then this came to you, or was this the beginning of your healing journey?
I was already working as a healer when this started. I was not a psychic child. I didn't have conscious psychic experiences. I was very empathic, but I had shut that down just because of the harsh environment that I was in. So in my adult years, late teens, early adults years, my psychic senses started opening up, and it was very slow. It happened over a long period of time. And then I would go through these experiences where they would amplify in kind of fast ways. By the time I was in my late 20s, I was seeing auras, I was hearing my guides, I was having a lot of different psychic experiences physically. And I got the impulse one day when I woke up sick to just run my hand over my body, and I would see energy leaving my body, and then I would clear out my hand. So after that experience, I started working on my friends and family, and then I started working with people that just would want healing. So, which kind of surprises me that they were so trusting, but it was people following their own intuition that there was something, an appropriate exchange there. So I had been doing that for a while, and I was very accustomed to listening to my guides and having them tell me what to do, what was occurring, and I would just follow those directions and observe. Then in the early 2000s, I had an axiotonal alignment, and after that was when the light language started coming through. And the axiotonal system is just part of our light body that is similar to like a universal meridian system, so you're connected with more of that universal flow instead of just the earth energy flows.
Yeah.
So once that occurred, the light language started coming through my hands and then eventually started coming through my mouth. And long story there of how I had to be lovingly shoved into the courage to let it out.
Yeah.
It was not something that I was familiar with or that I had experienced or seen and thought, I want to do that. So, so it was a bit of a long journey to come out of the closet for me.
Yeah. It's an interesting story. I mean, you mentioned that you were empathic, you didn't have the psychic gifts initially, but do you feel that you've kind of always really been on a spiritual path? Because for a lot of people, I mean, it's different. Like some people have it from a young age, and then for other people it's kind of there's a big awakening shift, and they maybe experience depression or a lot of disillusionment in the world, and from that the spiritual awakening arises. Did you have that kind of experience, or was it more just a very gradual awakening?
I did. I talk about that in my book, where I didn't know what was happening, but once I left home, I started having depression that I had never had before in my life. And it was, and that's when my psychic senses started opening as well. So part of that was harmonic convergence, which I didn't know about at the time. And then part of it was once I was out of an environment where I didn't have to protect so much, then things could start surfacing. So I had memories surfacing that had been completely blocked. I had physical things starting to happen, from physical pain to anxiousness, and depression was a big one. That was an overwhelm of my system that as things were surfacing, my body just could not process, and depression grew over the years. So it did lead me on a journey of discovery, but that opening was occurring all along the way. And this is something that I find is very consistent in life, that's kind of subtle, that we overlook. But life is always, always supporting you and compelling you toward your improvement. And what seems like such a challenge at the time, something like depression, is actually a healing process that your body is doing as fast as it can in a way that is best for you. And then you support that with your choices, but that this opening is such a natural process. The Lyran Council of Time that I channel, Ariane, is constantly talking about that. This is natural to you. You can't do it wrong. Life is supporting you through it. And so when we find those support systems for the challenges like depression or some of the physical things that come along with Ascension, we get into more of a space of ease. And that doesn't always mean complete bliss, but it means an opening that allows that flow more easily. And that's what I had to deal with in those early years, was finding that grounding and courage to connect in with myself and let emotions flow. Because when you're in that state of overwhelm, it seems hopeless or like you can't find the end of it. And eventually it gets easier and easier. And this is a natural process that everyone is going through in different ways.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm finding really good about the light language is if I just sit down and just switch off and just listen, it breaks that cycle. Because one of the things that's coming up for me at the moment is I kind of sometimes struggle to find that balance between rest and action, and you get stuck in that pattern of, oh, I need to keep taking action in order to feel like I've done enough, and then it starts a cycle where you start to become exhausted and overwhelmed. And I find that light language, just having that recording and being able to sit and relax, kind of breaks that cycle and lifts you up, and able to see with clarity again what's actually going on around you. So.
Yes, beautiful, because that heart communication helps soothe that mind, so that the mind is able to relax into its own process of discovery. So I'm so glad you brought that up. It's a pretty consistent pattern, and it's one that I know I have to watch for myself as well, because we're so taught to focus externally, and that action is the only way to create result. And then there's these levels of success that are based on your actions. So there's a lot of external that pushes us in that direction, but that truth of allowing that integration, that flow that's more heart-centered, is what really opens up the action to be more deeply connected. It's kind of like that dichotomy between being and doing. The Lyran Council of Time that I channel says, being is your inner work, and that's where everything starts. How am I feeling? How am I supporting myself? How am I nurturing myself? All of that inner work, that's the being. And then doing is the external work. So when you're doing in a way that is more deeply connected into the moment, that is actually being. So whether you're meditating, whether you're cleaning the house or doing something creative, it's that deep inner connection that brings that full connection of the self into the moment. And that's the core of Ascension, a fuller aspect of the self, not just the external or the physical, but the internal and the external, the subtle and the physical.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That makes complete sense to me, because that's actually seems to be that message being delivered to me more and more at the moment. Because I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he talks about, basically says you become addicted to this overwhelm or anxiety, whatever it is, and it keeps you in that cycle. But just stop scrambling outside in the world and trying to change everything. If you move inward and move into that place of, real power and the true you, then create from there, everything will like shift in a way. And I suppose that's kind of what you're talking about, the being and the doing.
Yes. Another way that Ariane explains this is there are passive and active forces, and the active force is what we see externally, or it's what we think of as action. I will complete this task. But it's that passive force, which we could call love, we could call compelling, we could call magnetism. It's that passive force that is actually the strong one. We could also call it invisible, or that subatomic core is a way that they explain that in very real and metaphorical terms. That in the nucleus of an atom, you have a positively charged proton and you have a neutral neutron. And that neutron is actually the biggest part of that whole structure. So between the protons, the electrons, and the neutron. So when you have equal neutrality and positive, you have a very stable nucleus. If you only had positive, only protons, or less neutrons than protons, you would have a radioactive experience there, where that positivity isn't a stable structure. And we see this when people start understanding their subtle nature, and they're like, oh, I'm going to only think positively. Oh, I'm going to only say positive words. I got to be positive, got to be positive. And meanwhile, all of the things that aren't being dealt with are kind of building up for a reaction. So that stability isn't there. It's that neutrality that creates that. Well, that nucleus is spinning. It is creating a movement that compels the electrons to it, or its opposite, or its completion. And that neutrality is the same as peace. It's the same as rest. It's the same as integration. But it's that positive that's compelling the negative, its completion. So when we are allowing more of life to flow, or that invisible force of neutrality, we are actually utilizing that invisible force that's so natural to us. So the atom, with all of that, electrons, protons, and neutrons, is actually 99% space and a little less than 1% matter. And that same ratio affects everything. We are 1% physicality, 99% invisible, higher self, connectedness. We take 1% action and can utilize 99% of that momentum when we are more peaceful, when we're observing and following our heart more, allowing that brain to play more and utilize its perfect functionality, which is to give a path to the heart, to give linearity to love, to give experience to desire. And that's that letting go of controlling the external, because you're trying to use more than 1% action. And you can get things done that way, but it's just not the most efficient system. So it ends up creating things like emotional outbursts because you can't control, or it creates fear, or it creates anxiety. So that peace and that love are not just platitudes, they are powerful forces, though they are passive forces. Passive doesn't mean weak. It means so strong within that it knows its capability and is patient enough to observe form and flow with it. And that understanding of the power of that peace and that love also requires the courage to look within and find the parts that you don't love, and deal with the things that frustrate you, and find that authentic path to empowered, neutral love.
Absolutely. And yeah, I suppose one of the challenges is that it does take energy to achieve that that neutral state, and it can be, challenging, and especially if you're feeling a lot of overwhelm or you experiencing burnout or anything like that. It does take a lot of energy to achieve that neutral state, and I suppose it's kind of like building a muscle, really. It takes time to practice. But I suppose meditation is probably one of the most powerful way to access that neutral state.
Yes. There's so many powerful ways, but meditation is a powerful one. And things like breathing, light language, tapping, Reiki, all of those types of things are helpful for accessing more of that neutrality. Just observing and allowing emotions to flow. Getting out in nature, because nature starts to work with our energy field and soothe us. Connecting with animals and children and playfulness and laughter. Those are all very healing and powerful things. And I love how you said it's like building a muscle. I use that metaphor all the time because it really is like building a muscle. You can't just go to the gym once, work out, and be like, done. I'm now healthy. You also can't go to the gym and just lift the strongest weight without consequence. If you do that, you're going to harm your body in some way because you took on more than you can handle at one time. So you have to work your way into more and more strength and stamina. And at first, it seems kind of hard. And like those first 2 weeks, you have to go almost every day because you're like, oh, I got to just force myself. Then by the end of that 2 weeks, you're like, oh, I'm excited to go because you've trained yourself chemically to understand the benefit of your interaction, and you're allowing that continual and gradual expansion to occur. So the hardest part is to trust yourself and stay with your internal healing and really being authentic with yourself so that you build that muscle of the courage to let go of something that you really wanted, or deal with the nebulous potential of not getting something that you want or not feeling something you want. When you do that, you actually access that neutrality. And sometimes I feel like we might avoid those because we feel like, oh no, if I focus on the negative or if I focus on what it feels like not to have it, then I'm telling the universe that's what I want to create. But the universe is much smarter than that. Have you ever heard people say the universe doesn't understand the word no?
Yeah.
Can you imagine a universe that is smart enough to create this but can't understand the word no? It just doesn't make sense. What that actually means, it's coming from a wonderful place and it's a part of the understanding, but what it actually means is we don't understand the totality of our vibrational communication because the universe completely understands no. If we are focusing on what we don't want, and how we're doing that is by going, I never get what I want, I'm not going to have, it's just not fair. But that intent stops there, then that's our vibrational information. You could also focus that same way and have that click of using the beautiful mind for its best efforts and go, oh, wait a minute, I'm releasing this. I'm not just focusing on this and amplifying this, I'm actually releasing this. So let those tears come, let that frustration flow, because the totality of your vibration is always speaking to the universe. And that's the key component of getting to that authentic place, is holding that knowingness that what you're going through, life is compelling you toward release, but you have to take that release. You have to take that final step of, I don't understand how or why, I'm surrendering my human capability into my divine capability. Or sometimes I say, I surrender my will to divine will, or my divine will, which is I let go of my human fears, my human ego, and I don't quite know how, when, or what, but I know that I'm releasing it because there's a part of me that is the wisdom of the universe.
That's wonderfully put. And that brings to mind about, I mean, if we could talk about like not shying away from negative emotion and just being an observer of it and releasing it. But also, I suppose that applies to life lessons as well, and just not, squashing down emotion and turning back from fear. And I think in one of your light language, I think the tele classes, I think you referred to it as a ring past not, and I kind of see that as a life lesson. And if you squash that down, or you suppress the feelings and you kind of turn back, every time it will return, and every time it does, it will increase in intensity. So it's important to try and face your fears and learn these lessons that the universe is showing you, and not shy away from it.
Yes, absolutely. It is the real courageous work, because we are kind of taught to avoid those things, taught to suppress negative emotions, instead of being taught how to deal with them in healthy ways. Because there are healthy ways and there are unhealthy ways. But there's not an ability to just judge that in a blanket, like saying, you can never yell when you're angry, because if you yell, that's harmful. It can be harmful, but there's positive ways to process any emotion, because all it is just information. So anger, for example, is the information of feeling powerless and wanting to regain personal power. Mm-hmm. So when you deal with that situation, that emotion, you're not just letting out anger and now I feel better. You're actually transforming that information. So as you deal with it, you create more strength and more wisdom, and you transform those feelings of powerlessness. So there's so many healthy ways to deal with information like that. And one of the important aspects is becoming strong enough within that you are your own wellspring of love flow. So what I mean by that is transforming the challenges and the negative emotions into their positive counterparts. Because on the other side of anger, what's connected to it, or creating that full atomic structure, so to say, what's on the other side of it is empowerment. What's on the other side of fear is courage. What's on the other side of hatred is compassion. And myriad other ways that we could explain those. But when we start to see that information as connected to our benefit, then it gets easier to deal with the fact that you hate this or you're afraid of that, because it doesn't define who you are. It defines what you're experiencing in a moment. So let's say I hate someone. That is not a definer that I'm a hateful person. It is not stopping me from love or from my capability. All it is just information that in that relationship, I am feeling some fear or some lack of compassion or some misunderstanding or some anger that is making me feel powerless in that moment. So if I can allow myself to feel that hatred and nurture myself through that, then what I will discover is I disliked a feeling of lack of power that relationship caused within me, but there is a potential that I can create that power for myself. If I don't do that, then suppressing that hatred just ends up making it a denser vibration within me, or a tightness or a lack of movement and a lack of flow, and then it creates response in other areas. So as you deal with them internally first, even if that means support from someone or something else, like light language or a life coach, then you are transforming from within and changing that vibration or changing that muscle one weight lifting at a time. And that's what I even like to say about challenges, where I'm observing something and I notice an emotion come up. I'm like, whoa, that was good exercise.
Yeah. Absolutely. So listening to your light language audios, there's a very strong undercurrent of love running through the whole recording. It's something which you come back to, a lot. I mean, what's the importance of love and trying to find love in all things?
Nice. Love is the binding force of the universe. It is the binding force of everything. It is what connects. And I had some early profound experiences in my opening where I kept getting messages and understandings about that core connection. Because it is love that creates or has a desire to continue and connect. And when you find that connection within yourself, you then are connecting outward in an entirely different way. So when you come from that neutral love, we could say unconditional love, but we have to honor the conditions of the physical realm. But when you find that neutral love, you are connecting from empowerment. You are sharing from an openness rather than fear, and it changes everything. So the core of my work has always been about amplifying that love within the individual that then ripples out and changes the world from a real change, not just the external change. And that impetus or that impulse to want to feel love is built into us. We can't get away from it because it's part of who we are. So even the most egregious things that we see being experienced on the earth, they are coming from a miscommunication of that love that's within and the love that is capable within every interaction. Mm. So a couple of different ways that came to me. One, I just got reminded of this week because I love the Cryon teachings from Lee Carroll, and they sent out an email with my book in it, so I had to talk about my Cryon experiences. And I had an experience early on where I was reading the first book, and I left my body and went unconscious, which I didn't know at the time, and had an experience with Cryon. And Cryon said to me, "Your power is great, Jaime." You know, that was the exact sentence, because when I came to and realized I had been unconscious, I had that deep memory along with some other stuff, but that was the important part that I wanted to share. Your power is great, Jaime. But that had a whole big download with it that was all about the power of love. The power that's great in Jaime is the exact same potential that's in every single being. Mm-hmm. And so that power is the power of love. And when we actualize the love that we are, even in a moment of hatred, that's when the world starts to change. Because in that moment of hatred, for example, it is about loving the self and allowing that misinformation of love, meaning this person is harmful to me, I don't like their behavior, there's something that they're doing that's taking away my power. When we deal with that from a loving, nurturing experience, it changes the interaction from that real, internal, neutral space. And people feel it. Mm. It's not something that you can continue to fake when people wake up. And that's what is so important to me, is that waking up. The other experience with it that was really profound for me was when I was first getting downloads of creating the CDs. Early on, there's a CD that I created called Aligning with Your True Power of Love. And they had said to me, my guides had said, this is actually the only CD you would ever need to create because it contains everything. Yeah. But sometimes we want a faster doorway. And so something like clear vision is going to have a more direct physical effect on your eyesight, and it would just take a little longer if you just went the Aligning with Your True Power of Love pathway. Right. So yeah. It is the core of everything and what will truly change the world.
That's wonderful. And one of the things that I love about your audios, which I completely agree with, even though people forget a lot, is that there are no bad people in the world. It's no one's no one's fault. There's no groups really that should be be pointed at and say it's your fault. And it's just everyone's got that core of love within them, and they've just forgotten and become disconnected from it. But everyone has it within them.
Yes, absolutely. And it takes time sometimes to access what a person will need to create change, but that potential is within every being, and their higher self and the universe is helping them to it's compelling them toward that change. There's a wonderful story, a wonderful life story of a musician, Emmanuel Jal, who was a child soldier from Kenya that was, doing very heinous crimes and things that weren't natural to him, but was kind of a forced or survival need at that time. And he was able to get out of that trap there, and had to go through all of this processing. And it's so poignant for me because it's so easy in his story to see how that traumatic experience created such a deep desire for love and compassion and healing in him. And he now devotes his life to helping to transform that experience. So everything, no matter how bad it is creating circumstances that will cause a human to seek that opposite. And the more the loving, compassionate people are getting their energy into the world instead of pulling back from it because that pain is strong, the more those loving, compassionate people are getting their energy into the world through prayer and action, that's when the world will really start changing. And it is. Mm-hmm. It's always been there, and it's amplifying now. And what we're seeing is so much more of that chaos that's creating the perfect experience for the desire for harmony. And it's not easy to watch sometimes.
Yeah.
But that internal work helps get that clarity and courage within, so that we each understand where our energy is most available for the best flow. And it just is something that life is going to continue helping you with as you do that internal work and become more connected within.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I completely agree with what you're saying as well. And that's why I picked the name Rise of Humanity for my podcast, because that's the way, even though there is chaos and it's not nice to look at times, like you said, the way I can see the potential within humanity, and that's why I picked the name, because I think that things are spiraling upwards, even though it is chaotic. So it's just it's a journey, it's a process, but
it is. Ariane says that life is fail-safe toward love, and that I completely agree with that, even though, yeah, exactly like you. Sometimes I watch things, I'm like, oh, I have to process some emotions, but I know the greater experience of this, that what it's leading to is more clarity, more connection, more courage, more compassion. But that connectivity is just through and through, and it's where we're headed.
Yeah.
And it's happening faster than is obvious.
Yes. And that brings me to another big part of your work is this as Ascension. And could you just explain what that means to you?
Yes. So again, very natural process. It's just a form of rapid evolution, or a time frame of rapid evolution, or an exciting point of our evolution, We are physical and we are non-physical, and we have been very physically focused. What's occurring now is we have experienced enough with this physical focus. We are raising our vibration, and that's even supported by what's occurring with the earth and in the space that we are now, that we are now becoming more conscious of the subtle interactions or the subtle realm. It's always been there, but now we're becoming more conscious with it. Ariane calls our thoughts and our emotions our subtle bridge. It's how we communicate with the subtle realm directly and how the subtle realm communicates with us directly. So it's important to think and feel in authentic ways and ways that are consciously aligned with your desires and your natural flow of life. So ascension to me is just a natural process of becoming more conscious of the subtle interaction, and that contains within it a physical readjustment where our physicality is affected by that raise in vibration or that expanse of the bandwidth of conscious interaction. Right now, in third density, we are more physically oriented, and what we can see, touch, taste, smell, and feel, we can hear, of the five senses, that's more tangible to us, and so we focus in those ways. Now we're bridging into fourth density, or what some will call in different subsets, the fourth dimension, fifth dimension, sixth dimension. You can subset out fourth density ad infinitum because dimensions are more of your perspective. But that physical readjustment as we move into fourth density is much more about the connective nature of life. And so things that are subtle laws that we interact with, like time, love, those become much more conscious and amplified in our understanding. So it's just an exciting point of evolution where we become more consciously interactive with the subtle realms.
Wonderful. And another point that you mentioned in your work that I hadn't really thought of before or heard of is the importance of balancing masculine and feminine energy for ascension, and I think you say that it's critical for ascension, really. So could you just explain the importance of that?
Yes. So masculine and feminine energy has nothing to do with being male or female, but you'll see some correlations in how we define those. So masculine energy, well, actually, first, every human being is very obviously created with masculine and feminine energy. Just for the physical expression, it requires the sperm and the egg to create the new human. So we are all made with masculine, feminine energy. And in this realm of duality, that is the macro separation of the self, masculine and feminine energy. So masculine energy is very direct. It is the external. We could call it the direction of expression or form. Feminine energy is the nurturing, the receiving, the internal, the invisible. And those two complete the wholeness. So when you are balancing your masculine, feminine energy, you are creating your own wholeness. You aren't resisting part of yourself or over-amplifying part of yourself. So you then are directing your energy and you are allowing. You are externally focused and you are internally focused. You are movement, you are rest. You are fully connected and utilizing that full flow of life. You will give, you will receive. And that's an important one, that that we are using that full flow of life. And in a moment, it might look like action, which is more masculine. Or in a moment, it might look like rest or patience, which is more feminine. But both of those should always be present in every experience to varying degrees, so that even as you are taking action, you have that peace within that knows that your flow is open and aware to new information and able to direct and adapt, which is a masculine energy. Even as you are patient, you are directive or conscious in your energy. And so that balancing of those is a key aspect for your own wholeness.
So, I mean, not to like judge on the way that people go out and achieve goals, but as an example for particularly men who are very much in that kind of alpha male role, who are like going out into the world, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get that, and they work 17 hours a day, hustle, very much in the masculine. Is that really incompatible with Ascension? Would you need more of a feminine energy to really move to higher levels of awareness and consciousness?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And because it's unsustainable, you're only using part of the energy, and you can do it. We can see that it can create money, it can create, buildings, it can be done. However, it's not sustainable. And so even the structures that are built with that energy must fall. So when you are balancing that energy, you are utilizing the fuller flow of creation. So for example, businesses, when they're masculine energy oriented, it's all about what can I take? What can I get? What can I create? It's me, direct, forward. But when they have that balance, then that movement forward is created in that nurturing structure that has a sustainable structure. So for example, employees feel safe. The growth is something that is nurturing to community, to environment, to the future. If a business only had feminine energy, then a business would just be, we'll only do for others. We don't need to move forward. Let's just see what happens. So that's not viable for a business either. So a business should then have both of those energies. Family is the same way. Relationship is the same way. Every single structure, growing crops is the same way. Every single structure needs that balance of both, or it will create an unsustainable environment for its own continuance.
Yeah.
I find this a lot with myself and clients. I call myself a recovering type A personality because, and depending on your personality and how you were growing up and what your tendencies are, Ascension can sometimes mean a slowing down or a stopping of patterns that are unsustainable. I said Ascension will sometimes mean that. No, Ascension always means that. That it is about breaking down any structures within the self that are not sustainable, because that higher frequency bandwidth that we are moving into, it requires rules that apply to the subtle realm or to that expansion. And this is another way that we're kind of circling back into that positive focus or singular focus or not honoring the wholeness, is when you are focused only in one direction, you're not honoring the full spectrum. And quite often what we will do is We learn about the subtle realm, and then we apply the rules of the physical realm. Oh, the subtle realm is more about love. Okay, I'm going to love, 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 love. Yeah. And then we forget to let the self heal some of the challenges. So that focus in the subtle realm, expansion into more conscious interaction with the subtle realm, means changing our rules of interaction. And it can't just be about doing, because that compelling of love cannot be controlled. It can be controlled and suppressed in the physical realm, but that's not actually love. That's just control. So we have to shift those rules, and that means sometimes shifting our behaviors from things that created in the past and it no longer works. So if there's too little activity or standing up for the self, you will be called into your masculine energy. I experienced that as well. If there's too much activity, you will be called into more of your feminine energy. I experienced that balancing as well. So it's really about becoming more whole and co-creative in a fuller way.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I can definitely see that balancing act going on in my life, and having that awareness now, hearing you talk about it's kind of quite freeing. So I'll definitely be creating more awareness around that. And again, light language, such a powerful tool to use to balance your masculine and feminine energies.
Yes, I agree.
So just lastly, could you just talk a bit about your crystalline soul healing method that you've developed? Because I'd like to just hear a bit about that.
Yes. I used to teach it, and then I stopped teaching it for a while I was developing the light language class, and I just started teaching it again in Japan this year. So it's really exciting to see that coming forth again. Crystalline Soul Healing is a modality that I developed, not trying to develop a modality. It just happened.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but when my guides were teaching me to do healing, ultimately it ended up becoming a template that helps people heal through the higher self. So it actually is a way of working with energy that's very balanced with the masculine and feminine energy. Mm-hmm. There is a direction to it, but there's that allowing of not attempting to force the body or the emotions into a healing that they're not ready for. So it creates a deep healing within. And what crystalline soul healing is an alchemical template that your higher self is utilizing, that it's like running through a program, almost like a defragmentation on the computer or a virus scan, how we would think of those, where it's going through very specific actions, but based on what's needed in that moment, it's going to respond. And that your higher self is always choosing that. So similar to light language, in that we are learning to work with energy in direct ways, but open and allowing to the natural flow of the higher self that creates the perfect healing in the moment for that person. And so what I find is things can shift quickly. Things can shift over time because there's layers that are being experienced, and there's wisdom that's growing from within each person. And crystalline soul healing is a specific template that's open to the wisdom of the higher self and creates the wisdom within the human self.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. And so can you combine that with light language during a healing session, and you can use it all together?
Yes. I find that crystalline soul healing, it can be used on its own, and it combines very well with other things because it has that direction and it has that allowing that's occurring alongside other things. Same thing with light language. It can be utilized just by itself, or it can combine easily with many other things, because there's that aspect of allowing and support that creates a good synergy between modalities. So they each stand alone and they each combine well with many things.
Yeah, sounds great. So, well, it's probably like a million more questions I can ask you, but I have to round it off at some point. So there's one question that I like to ask everyone at the end of the interviews, and that would be, what would be your best advice on how people can contribute to the rise of humanity?
Love yourself. Love yourself. It's what nurtures everything into a true healing. Ariane gives an exercise of putting your hands on your heart so that you're creating a strong flow between your heart chakra and your hand chakras, and that parasympathetic nervous system is stimulated, and speaking words of love to yourself from that third person, as if you were talking to yourself. I love you, Jamie. I love you, Chris. Actually saying your name so that you're learning some detachment from your experiences, but also connection. And that loving the self helps to support your inner change so that you become the wellspring of love. And what occurs when you do that is there's not something from the outside that you're needing. So it breaks that cycle of desperation that most often is unconscious, so that the interactions are much more open and flowing. And it seems hard to do at first, to give up that desire for connection from the outside. But you're not actually giving that up. You're strengthening your internal connection, and then that creates a clearer flow from the outside so that you're able to receive and give more easily. So loving the self is the core to everything, because it changes how you experience life. It changes how you perceive people, how you perceive time, yourself, your journey, your potential. It changes everything.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that incredible advice. So would you just like to share with the listeners then where they can find out more about you and your work?
Yes. So my website is jamyeprice.com, and that has light language audio downloads, information for private sessions, classes that I teach that are online, that are in person, that are available one-off or even via subscription program. There is tons of free information there. I love to write. I send out a weekly email that has current Ascension information and a light language video every month. So you can subscribe for my free newsletter there, my YouTube channel, and it provides continual support for this powerful process that we are all going through. That website is jamyeprice.com. My name is spelled a little odd. It's JamyePrice. And I look forward to connecting with all of you and helping to amplify that beautiful love that is within you. And Chris, I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm so glad you found that calling of one aspect of your powerful journey, which is providing people with information to help raise humanity. So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for your kind words, and just sharing this amazing work that you are doing with the listeners. And it's definitely something which has impacted me, so I'm very grateful for it. So just thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
So that is all for today, guys. Hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you are interested in what we've talked about, I highly recommend you check out Jamie's website. I'll put the link in the show notes, and check out her light language audios. It will be well worth your while. So thank you very much for listening. I'll catch you all next time. Take care. Bye-bye.